Hello, everyone, and welcome to First Air. Hello, George.
Hey, Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing very good. Excited here for episode number 3 of our podcast. And we have a very interesting episode for you all today on tap. And before we get into that, we definitely want to spend a few minutes to recap our last episode that we just did with Eric Costango. And we're going to, dive deep into the topic after this. But before we do that, George, please tell us more.
Well, Kevin, I think it's a great opportunity to introduce our new segment that we're calling Inside the Standard. And what this is going to be is just an opportunity for us to deep dive into a topic, a compounding conundrum, maybe we'll call it. And boy, do we have a doozy for you today, don't we? Wow, this one's going to be fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
This one. Pharmacy compounding and Aerogen syringes. Boom. Right? Heads are exploding. Here we are. We're going to bring it to you. So, but I think it's great. Let's talk about Eric for just a second and recap what we talked about, because that was a wow for me. And I think it was for our audience. I think it was for you. So what resonated with you, Kevin?
Yeah. So I think the audience could see is that, we could talk to Eric for hours. And in fact, I think we actually talked to him for about an hour before the episode.
We sure did.
We should have just hit record during our initial session, but so incredibly grateful for, Eric to spend the time with us and just his mentorship, for me personally, over the years, and has been such an important figure for me and looking up to about, be great to be like Eric one day and make an impact in compounding, and to, have him as a guest on the episode and ask some of these, I think, really important questions, about how we got to where we're at today and where we need to go. Right. So I had a lot of fun, with you, George, interviewing Eric. And, one thing that really stood out to me, and in one of his, comments to a question we had, was in and around just the length of time since NECC happened, right? That's that Sentinel event where we had this big compounding, a tragedy that occurred. There's patient harm, there's patient death. And, in that period, after NECC, folks were very in tune with, we need to do more in compounding. We need to heighten the standards. We need to heighten regulations. Everyone was laser focused on that. So I asked Eric about his thoughts about, hey, it's been 14 years since that has happened, right? Are we going to get to a point where folks are going to start forgetting? And before I could even finish my sentence, Eric said, Kevin, they've already forgotten. Right. And it just kind of like hit me. It was like, he's so right. And it's also, in many ways, George, I don't know about you, but it's also why I think we need to do this podcast. We need to continue this conversation, continue this vigilance of doing more than the bare minimum so we can prevent something like an NECC tragedy happening again. So I don't know, George, what was were some of your points that
100%.
Resonated with you?
I think I do think as a profession, we've kind of forgotten what that was and what that did, and going forward, and 100% about the why we're doing this. Let's just keep talking about it. Let's keep talking about beyond the standard. Let's talk about the minimum standard. Let's talk about all these important things. But I think the thing that resonated with me the most, as well as that, was the fact that the barriers are still there. The barriers from 2004 USP 797 are still there. And we're breaking through some of them. We're getting closer. The longest journey begins with the very first step, right? So I think we're getting closer to those barriers, breaking them down. Is it money? Is it space? I think it's everything. It's attitude. We've forgotten how serious this really can be. So it was, again, Eric was great. I mean, we could talk to him. We got to talk to him again. I think there's some FDA stuff we need to bring him in on.
Yes.
Discuss
he will
some
definitely
of the
be
things.
back. We've warned him.
Definitely be, warned him in and penciled him in. Exactly. But yeah, I think that was a lot. And, we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, appreciate that recap there. And, with this podcast, we have some really great guests, that will be coming up in some of our future episodes. And so appreciate you listening in for those as well. And maybe Eric will make another appearance here in the near future. But for today's episode, we are going to shift gears a little bit. And we're going to do this deep dive inside the standard, talking about Aerogen syringes. Now, this is a question we did get in from one of our audience listeners and viewers. So thank you for submitting your questions of, can you please help us address this Aerogen, and I'll insert the term compounding conundrum. Right. So before we get into this conundrum, what is an Aerogen syringe? Either your organization is using it and you're very familiar with these challenges, or maybe it's not quite on your list yet, but maybe coming up, especially with some of the increasing clinical uses and data of some of these continuous inhalation types of therapies. But Aerogen, it's obviously a branded type of product. It is a medical device. It's an empty syringe with a tube set that goes in for respiratory therapists to deliver continuous nebulization therapies to patients. That's what it is, right? So far, no conundrum. We're good so far, right?
Right.
The device is like I said, a class 2 medical device. It is not approved as a drug storage container, right? So really important when we look at some of the approval criteria and how it was intended to be used, right? So some of the challenges that are out there, and this is what the question is, that was submitted, is around the device is non-sterile. Well, when we look at USP 797, we see that inhalation solutions are required to be sterile. Mm-hmm. So the situation is it acceptable to use a non-sterile administration device like the Aerogen syringe as a device for delivering sterile compounded inhalation medications? So generally this comes up in these health systems or hospitals where pharmacy is doing the compounding in their clean rooms within the main pharmacy, and they make those in advance. So then when the nurse or respiratory therapist needs that medication, it's in a ready to administer form,
right,
labeled, ready to go. They just need to connect it and go. So obviously that presents some situational challenges here. George, you kind of want to touch a little bit more on the background here?
Yeah, well, I think it's good to look at the question too. So this is kind of, it was a hi, George and Kevin question, which was really cool. I have a question about epoprostenol inhalation in Aerogen syringes. Our hospital sterile compounding team has been discussing this for a while and have come up with the following options for compounding and beyond use dates based on USP 797. Number one, we can assign a date of 48 hours at room temperature and or 8 hours refrigerated per manufacturer guidance. Number two, beyond use date of 24 hours at room temperature and or 96 hours refrigerated per USP 797 in the section that is prepared from one or more non-sterile starting components. We'll touch on that a little bit more. Or finally, 4 hours at room temperature per USP 797 immediate use compounding provision. Would love for you guys to weigh in on this situation as it is confusing and there are many options. Well, I will say wholeheartedly, you're exactly right. I think there is a lot that we need to talk about with this one. And, Kevin, you hit the nail on the head talking about the FDA and USP 797. In fact, there is FDA law, 21 CFR 200-51 says all aqueous-based drug products for oral inhalation must be manufactured to be sterile. Okay. This applies to both prescription and OTC nebulizer solutions in their final packaging. So let's think about, remember this word final packaging or dispensing as we're going to talk about it. So we've got FDA here saying that. USP says the same thing, right? You already just said that. And we're talking about compounding now. USP 797 governs compounding and really requires this aqueous inhalation solution to be a compounded sterile product. But the Aerogen syringe is non-sterile. Here's our conundrum. How are we going to navigate this? So the Aerogen syringe was designed, marketed, and approved as a single patient, single use administration device, not intended for storage or compounding. Here we are. There's the big background and the big statement, right? If you even look at the manufacturer's guidance, approved labeling, it is a medical device, they instruct bedside filling. bedside filling of the device prior to use using some type of sterile needle or connector. Well, that seems to track with what we're thinking, I believe. And finally, the FDA's expectation for an administration device in this manner is consistently, it does not have to be sterile. We think about the nebulizer cups and other types of nebulizer machines other than the Aerogen Solo. Those cups are not sterile. Those are the same type of administration devices. I think we get into this, oh my gosh, it's a syringe. I think we can compound in it. I think we can store in it. So that's a little bit of the background if you don't know much about Aerogen syringes. And I think Kevin and I were talking this week about it and really even discussed the fact that if you're not using these syringes in your hospital, there's probably a time in the future that you may be. Yeah. Even the non-acute facilities are starting to see these a little bit more.
And real quick, George, for if somebody has never, used these before, they're probably thinking, why are we using this Aerogen syringe and not just the standard syringe?
Right.
So these are approved for inhalation only, right? And so the connector piece that's on the end of the syringe is a proprietary type of connector. And this is all for patient safety to prevent inadvertent administration to the wrong line, right? You don't want to inject something intended for inhalation into somebody's epidural space, right? So these, proprietary or unique connectors are distinctly different than the IV route for that specific reason. So Aerogen is really the industry standard. For those, it connects with all of their tube sets and all of their devices. It does not connect with IV lines and those things. So that's the big reason of why folks are using this type of syringe as opposed to other syringes that they're used to compounding in, if you will.
Absolutely. So, but from here, what's the impact of this? Where do we go now?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things that, we need to kind of like break down. And I like to take these kind of complex challenges because I think this one stems over a multitude of different problematic areas, right? That can be difficult to think about a solution if you're not breaking it down to these smaller problems. But before we do that, I think it's important for what does it mean when something is non-sterile, right? Especially in these types of, FDA regulated or approved, type of or registered medical devices, right? The term non-sterile might have this negative connotation, right? That it's laden with spores and bioburden and all of this. Well, that's
manufactured in a filthy environment, and we know the FDA actually requires it to be very, very clean. Right.
That's right. And even beyond that, right, these devices are clean, right? And so how do you define clean? Well, part of this registration process as a class 2 medical device is there are other standards out there that require some testing, right? So namely, there's an international standard, ISO 13485, right, that is going to be talking about some of the residual manufacturing bioburden on these non-sterile devices and keeping those within safe limits. So again, it's not sterile, but there is standards to make sure that these devices are clean, right? Now for this, instance, obviously this is being used as an inhalation device. We currently today are breathing in non-sterile air, right? Very different than a device that's approved for intravascular administration. Those would be required to be sterile, obviously, right? So I wanted to get that out of the way. So when we kind of think about the assessment, of each of these is I want to break down, each one of these things. So can you pre-fill an Aerogen syringe in pharmacy? Well, you could, right? But that would not be in coordination or alignment with USP 797. Nothing in 797 allows for you to use a non-sterile drug container, right?
Right.
So we hear some folks will say, oh, well, we're just going to, chalk it up to be immediate use. They're going to put a 4-hour BUD on it and everything is fine. The chapter does not allow for that, right? Nowhere in there does it talk about the use of non-sterile containers. It says these are the required routes of administration that require things to be sterile. Inhalation solutions is one of them.
Yeah.
So if you're putting it into a non-sterile container, you do not have a sterile drug anymore, right? So
So
right off the bat, that is
right off the
something to
bat,
take
yeah.
off the table. You
It's
cannot pre-fill these in pharmacy and mitigate the, through a shortened thing that would not be in compliance with 797.
Well, we've gotten the question before, and I've seen the question before. But what about the using it as a non-sterile component? That portion in the beyond use dates, right, where it says one or more non-sterile components, you're allowed to give it, 4 days refrigerated.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that. I think we've talked about that ad nauseum with a number of people, even the compounding experts in the non-sterile world, that say, at the end of the day, a container like that is number one, not a component, right? And number two, it's required to be sterilized, that component. So that non-sterile drug that we're terminally sterilizing or sterilizing by filtration is now sterile. We can't do that with an Aerogen syringe. So that's off the table. Like that option number two that we said of non-sterile component, that's already off the table.
That's right. Yeah, because that really in 797, the context there is you're using a non-sterile drug component or even an inactive, drug ingredient component. And it comes as a bulk API, which is, not sterile, right? So yes, the chapter lists things where you can use non-sterile starting components, but to George's point, that if you continue to read the chapter, is those items need to be sterilized either through aseptic filtration or some type of terminal sterilization process. So, for those that, are pointing to that as their justification for pre-filling the Aerogen syringe, that's a big, not compliant, with 797. So now we get into kind of, these other, remaining ones. And there is a fine balance, George, of when you look at solving this conundrum of we obviously want to balance and maintain the sterile pathway, right? And so we can be compliant with 797 if you're doing this in pharmacy. But we also want to balance this in what we're doing from these wrong route errors, right? Because the whole point of the Aerogen is we're trying to prevent, connecting to an IV line, right? Or an epidural line or other types of elements that are here. So how I kind of think about this is there actually needs to be a layer of items that you need to implement to prevent this rather than a single, this is the best pathway forward and it's going to solve all your problems, right?
Right.
So we should break this down into compounding, right? Of how do we address this from compounding or not? Dispensing, right? There's a dispensing aspect. How do we get these drugs to these respiratory therapists to use these? How do we label it? How do we package it?
Right.
And then lastly, which, we don't spend a lot of time in pharmacy because it's out of scope of 797, but administration. Right? That's not defined in 797 or I should say it's out of scope of 797. So we have to lean into some of those as well. So when we think about that first stage, right, we're in compounding. Again, 797 says these aqueous inhalation solutions, they got to be sterile. They need to be prepared, right, in clean conditions, either those ISO class 5 for your category 1, your category 2, your category 3, or it could be done as an immediate use compound, right? But that solution needs to be sterile, right? And we need to maintain the sterility of that.
Right, 100%. That's the point. That is the point here, right? Is the solution itself needs to be sterile.
Correct. So one compounding strategy that you could do here is, since the Aerogen is off the table from a compliance standpoint, since it's a non-sterile, element there, is you could package this or compound this, dilute it, whatever your inhalation solution you're working on, and put it into a sterile device. It could be a vial. It could be a syringe, right? And even thinking about the syringe, it could be a slip tip syringe. It could be an irrigation syringe. It could be something that doesn't have a lure lock. It doesn't necessarily have to have that. We just have to make sure that whatever system it is, you have a means of transferring that into that final Aerogen container, either through a needle or some type of connector piece to do that. So that is one strategy for compounding. If you're going to solve this through compounding, is use an alternative container, right? And then we'll talk about the transferring once we get to the administration side.
And I think, to be clear, Kevin, we both feel very strongly about not compounding this in the Aerogen syringe, right? And storing it in the Aerogen syringe for any period of time, either within the pharmacy refrigerator, in an Omnicell, on the nursing unit, whatever the case may be. That is the intention of not using the non-sterile device.
That's right. So we get next into now this dispensing workflow. So let's say you went down this route of filling a sterile container, right, that is later going to be transferred into the Aerogen. Is how do you do this in a safe and compliant manner? Well, if the whole goal is to have them transfer this into there and to not have these misadventures, is where's the easy button? How do you make this as easy as possible for them to be safe and compliant? So one thing you could do is packaging all of the pieces together. You have your filled, let's just say it's a Luer lock syringe. You have your filled syringe. It's labeled, it's stable, it's sterile, safe, right? Go ahead and add in the empty Aerogen syringe and its packaging, the tube set, package everything together, have an instruction for use clearly labeled. I'm a big fan of pictures, so you could even put a picture.
A pictogram. Oh, absolutely. 100%.
That's right. Respiratory therapy only. I mean, you could really draw this out to make it very clear to the end user that, hey, something is different here, right? And there's layers in there to prevent these types of misconnections. The other piece with the dispensing, where we see certainly in health systems where things can go awry, is how does it actually get to the area that needs to be administered?
Right. The tube system. We're going to
tube it. Is it the tube system? Is it thrown into a med room? Is it on the counter with other meds?
Yep.
Like that is a recipe for disaster.
100%.
Somebody is going to grab the wrong product and administer it to the wrong patient, whatever the case, right? And so this might be an item because of the heightened sensitivity, because of some of these challenges here that you say, you know what? We are going to hand deliver this to respiratory therapy, right? If we really want to prevent these types of misadventures,
right,
let's go ahead and hand deliver this. And it's not going to go onto a counter. It's not going to go into a med room. It's going to go into the hands of the respiratory therapist that's going to be administering this, because they're the only ones in your health system that are trained to do these types of therapies, most likely.
Right. And thankfully, they're not trained to do IV meds. So the chance of them hooking that up to an IV line is probably slim. Delivering it to them, however that process works, whether you deliver that to them or they come and pick it up. I mean, I think there's a sense in that. Maybe they can speak to a pharmacist or somebody in the staff when they pick it up if they're unfamiliar with it. But the key to that is I want that to stay on their person, right? I don't want them to lay that down in the nurse's station. I hope their scrub, tops have pockets. Right? I want them to put it in their pocket. The one time that I want somebody in the hospital to have something in their pocket, keep it on your person, right? I think but you hit it really. We've got to layer some things on top, because one way of just, hey, we're going to tube it and we're going to put for inhalation only auxiliary label on it. Okay, that rarely works. One thing rarely works in these situations,
That's
right? We've all seen it. So again, I think there's lots of different ways to do this. Yeah.
So the next piece, or last piece here, is now on the administration side, right? So if we've made this in pharmacy, we've packaged it up into a kit, we've hand delivered it to respiratory therapy. Now it's on the respiratory therapy end to do their part of this process, which is transferring the fluid from the syringe into the Aerogen syringe, right? Now, it was interesting. I was speaking to a few hospitals who were like, oh, our respiratory therapy could never do this, or whatever the case. I was like, I've spoke to some respiratory therapists and they're like, you just want me to transfer it from one container to the other? Like, we do that all day already, all right? With their albuterol solutions or other types of things. Like, this is already something they're trained to do, right? And in pharmacy, we may not have the appreciation for what their everyday looks like, right? If it's not involving compounding. So again, you could certainly, have some training and some competency checklists for these items, for them. So they're, in tune with what the process or what good looks like. So you might specify to use a blunt fill needle, attach it to that syringe containing that, pull the plunger back on the Aerogen syringe and squirt the medication in. And while that might seem very foreign to folks in pharmacy to allow that to happen, that's how this device was approved and intended to be used.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think that's really, really key, right? Because once they're filling that, they're going to be giving that to that patient, right? So having communication streams when they're ready to administer that to the patient, requesting it from pharmacy, right? We need to work together, as healthcare practitioners to streamline this process and, help prevent, any patient safety gaps there, but also have a high quality product that's, going to be given, to these patients.
And I think
again,
thankfully,
single use. So
yeah,
once you're done
single
with
use.
it, you need to toss it out, right? We're not
Right.
refilling these. It's a one-time use. They need another therapy. You're going to start the process.
Yeah, I think, thankfully, we're usually typically talking about a small portion of respiratory therapy that is going to even be dealing with this. We're not talking about every respiratory therapist in the hospital. Typically, some do rotate through multiple different places, but the way we have seen it work in our organization is that it's a smaller group. It's a smaller group that is going to be having to administer ibuprostanol, and which is great, which makes that a lot easier. And you hit on that single use. One of the things that we've recognized is, the tubing can be used for multiple days, but the syringe has to be thrown out with each use. And I think if you look at that from that perspective, and that question that we asked in the very beginning, can a non-sterile administration device be used for this, is yes, because it's single use, single patient. We discard that device and we use another one for the next time and the next go around. So I think that there's a plan here. It's hard. It does move the cheese of respiratory therapy's workflow, right? We're asking respiratory therapy to do something. And I think the training and coming alongside of them and collaborating with them to make this work is very important to them. And I think we can answer a lot of questions for them.
Yeah. I think, all in all, when I look at this, initially we called it a compounding conundrum.
Yeah.
I think this is more of a dispensing and administration conundrum than it is compounding, right? But I guess compounders, we want to solve all the problems like ourselves.
We want to solve all the compounding problems.
That's right. There you go. And we've just, the industry has wrestled with this because we got a non-sterile device. We're not used to non-sterile devices. What do we do here? Right. So hopefully some of these, tips, approaches, thought processes, that George and I shared, were particularly helpful here. I don't know, George, any last remaining thoughts or points for our audience on what we would recommend?
Well, I think you have to sit down and talk to respiratory therapy. It's been my experience explaining the process, explaining the non-sterility of the syringe, and in the manner in which we would like to have them have the product as quickly as possible and as routine. That we need to, if we're going to batch it, if we're going to compound it, we're going to do it in a sterile manner. We're going to dispense it to them in a sterile syringe. And I think having that conversation is where you start. And it's been my experience that they're willing to listen. It's been my experience that they understand. And, your mileage may vary, but I think the right way to do this is for us to dispense this.
Absolutely. So really in summary here, hopefully, these tips were helpful, and I think it really supports expert consensus and, even guidance around these Aerogen systems with what we'll call the modified, workflow, is essential because it's going to ensure that you have that sterile medication in a proper container, and you're going to be following and be compliant with USB 797. You're going to have nursing and respiratory therapy perform that final transfer in the Aerogen nebulizer syringe at the bedside using sterile technique, which aligns again with how the device was intended to be used and approved by the FDA. So really key to actually look at these medical device, approval letters. And this is, again, a balance between that regulatory compliance, that sterile drug product, with those device safety features, such as that preventing those misconnections, misadventures that may happen. So we hope you found this approach to compounding conundrums and other operational challenges helpful in this segment that we kicked off here in today's episode called Inside the Standard.
Yeah, wow, great. That's some great stuff, Kevin. Thank you. I've again, it goes back to it's being used as it's designed. And so we just need to be part of that process. So in wrapping some of this up, we're going to go into, I'm going to link, as I always have, I say always have, a couple episodes, our upcoming webinars and CEs that are out there, but they've got a couple coming up really soon. April 14th, making USB 797 as easy as 1, 2, 3. Patty Keenley, Cindy Brasher, and Jackie Jaskowiak. Oh, that's going to be a good one. Environmental best practices with the Abby Roth on April 24th. The state of pharmacy compounding on May 1st. What? That's you and I. You and I are going to be doing that one. The state of pharmacy compounding.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah. And then some there in training stuff going on in May. Mary Nazal and Melanie Dory on sterile compounding live and virtual non-HD and HD training. And so we'll list these in the show notes. But jump on those. Those are some great people doing some things in just talking about what we want to talk about. Another thing Eric keeps telling us, get up to the plate, right? Stand up to the plate, taking it bat. And that's what all these people are doing. So I think that is really fantastic that we're doing that. So this has been fun. Aerogen syringes, poof, right? A lot of people have that thought when it comes up. So that's going to be some good stuff.
Yeah. And we'd love to hear from you. I know we have our email to, take questions. We would love your feedback on some of these. Are there other approaches, that would be compliant and safe that we didn't talk about that you would like to share? Certainly we presented one option for you to consider today, but there may be other options out there. So we'd love to hear from you. So George, I think we're ready to wrap this episode up here.
Yeah.
So, to our audience, please, we'd love for you to like, subscribe, share with your colleagues this podcast, especially if you found this to be particularly helpful. And George and I are here so you can stay informed, you can be inspired, and ready to elevate your compounding practices. We'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah, we will. Take care, guys.